They looked ordinary, polite, friendly, the kind of people you'd pass on the street, smile at in the grocery store, or wave to from your front yard. But behind those smiles lived monsters. They were fathers, students, church leaders, caretakers, people who hid their darkness behind the mask of normal life, until the truth came out. From quiet suburbs to crowded cities, these are the killers who lived among us. The ones who blended in, the ones no one ever suspected. The ones who proved that evil doesn't always lurk in the shadows. Sometimes it's sitting right next door. This is The Killers Next Door, a journey into the lives of those who fooled everyone, until their secrets finally surfaced. He looked ordinary. A quiet man living alone in a small apartment in Milwaukee. Polite, soft-spoken, the kind of person no one ever suspected. But behind that calm face hid one of the most disturbing killers in history. This is the story of Jeffrey Dahmer. Between 1978 and 1991, Dahmer murdered 17 young men and boys, turning his apartment into a house of horrors. He wasn't driven by rage or revenge, but by a twisted obsession with control, possession, and the idea of keeping his victims forever. Dahmer's story begins, like many others, with loneliness and darkness growing beneath the surface. As a child, he was quiet and withdrawn. Neighbors remembered him as shy, awkward, fascinated with dead animals and anatomy. It was the kind of detail that seemed harmless, until it wasn't. After high school, Dahmer's life spiraled. He drank heavily, dropped out of college, and began acting on the fantasies that had haunted him for years. His first murder came in 1978, just weeks after graduation. A hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks. He lured him home, killed him, and dismembered the body. It was the beginning of something horrific. For years, Dahmer drifted through life unnoticed, holding jobs, blending into the background. But inside his apartment, his crimes grew darker. He drugged his victims, strangled them, and kept their remains, bones, skulls, and photographs, as trophies. By 1991, his apartment had become a crime scene so gruesome, detectives would never forget it. The end came on July 22, 1991. One man escaped, Tracy Edwards, handcuffed, terrified, and running for his life. He led police straight to Dahmer's apartment, where they found human remains in the fridge, acid barrels filled with bones, and photos documenting every step of the killings. Dahmer was arrested that night. In court, he confessed to everything, calm, emotionless, even cooperative. He said he didn't kill out of hate, but out of loneliness. He wanted to keep his victims close, forever. Words that chilled investigators to the bone. In 1992, Jeffrey Dahmer was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms in prison. 2 years later, he was beaten to death by another inmate. No trial could have captured the full horror of what he'd done, or the pain he caused to the families of his victims. Even decades later, Dahmer's name still haunts the world. He became the face of pure darkness, the man who smiled while the world struggled to comprehend his evil. He wasn't the monster hiding in the shadows. He was the neighbor upstairs, the man who said hello in the hallway, the one no one ever looked twice at. Jeffrey Dahmer, the killer next door who showed us that sometimes the quietest people hide the loudest horrors. Every case hides another story. Don't miss it. Subscribe now and keep following the trail. He was quiet, polite, the kind of neighbor who wouldn't draw attention. A grad student studying criminology, obsessed with the psychology of killers. But behind that calm, academic face hid one of the darkest crimes in modern history. This is the story of Bryan Kohberger. It was the early morning of November 13th, 2022, in Moscow, Idaho, a small college town known for its peace, its quiet, and the University of Idaho. But that night, something unthinkable happened. 4 students, Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogan, Zana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, were brutally stabbed to death inside their off-campus home. No forced entry, no sign of robbery, just horror. The crime scene shocked investigators. It was as if rage itself had taken human form. For weeks, the town was paralyzed with fear. The killer had vanished. Police combed through thousands of tips, camera footage, and cell tower data, but nothing fit. Until one small detail broke the case wide open. A white Hyundai Elantra, spotted near the house around the time of the murders, registered to one man, Bryan Kohberger, a 28-year-old criminology PhD student at nearby Washington State University. On paper, he was brilliant, studying criminal behavior, teaching classes, and discussing the minds of killers. He even took surveys asking ex-cons how they chose victims, how they felt during their crimes. But behind the academic curiosity was something darker, a fascination that crossed the line from study into obsession. Investigators linked Kohberger's cell phone to the area of the murders, multiple times before the killings, as if he had been stalking the victims. DNA recovered from a knife sheath left at the scene matched his family's genetic profile. It was the break detectives had been waiting for. On December 30th, 2022, in the early morning hours, a SWAT team raided Kohberger's parents' home in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. He was taken into custody, silent, calm, emotionless. The man who studied criminals now stood accused of being one. Since then, the world has watched his every move. His trial has faced delays, questions, and theories about motive, evidence, and psychology. Did Kohberger target his victims out of rage, rejection, or fascination? No one knows for sure. But what haunts people most isn't just what he allegedly did. It's who he was before it happened. A student admired by professors, a teaching assistant grading essays on justice and morality, a man who lived among his peers, unnoticed, unthreatening, until the night everything changed. Bryan Kohberger became a chilling example of what this video is all about. The killer next door, the one you'd never suspect, the one who blends in, smiles politely, and hides a storm beneath the surface. If the allegations are true, he studied evil for years, until he finally became it. He was a husband, a father, a church leader, the kind of man you'd wave to across the street, never realizing the monster behind the smile. For more than 30 years, he terrorized Wichita, Kansas, binding, torturing, and killing his victims while living a perfectly normal life. His name, Dennis Rader. But the world would come to know him by 3 letters that defined pure evil. BTK, bind, torture, kill. It all began in 1974. Rader entered the home of the Otero family, where he brutally murdered 4 people, including 2 young children. It was the first of 10 known killings, and when police arrived, they found something that would set him apart from every other killer. A letter. A chilling confession, signed simply, BTK. Over the years, Rader taunted law enforcement. He sent letters to the press describing his murders in haunting detail, demanding attention, craving control. He wanted to be known. He wanted the world to fear him. And yet, he managed to disappear between killings, vanishing back into the role of Dennis Rader, the friendly neighbor, the Cub Scout leader, the devoted church president. For decades, he lived 2 lives. One as a respected family man, the other as a methodical serial killer who stalked his victims for weeks before striking. He documented everything: photos, sketches, notes. It was his private world of control, fantasy, and domination. Then, in 1991, the killings suddenly stopped. The BTK killer went silent. Years passed. Some believed he had died, but Rader was still there, just waiting to be noticed again. In 2004, a local newspaper ran a story about the 30th anniversary of the Otero murders. BTK read it, and his ego couldn't resist. He began sending letters again, this time using computers and floppy disks. What he didn't realize was that technology had finally caught up to him. Detectives traced the metadata from one of the disks to a church computer, registered to Christ Lutheran Church in Wichita. The president of that church? Dennis Rader. When police arrested him in 2005, they found a man who looked utterly ordinary. Married, employed, calm. But inside his home were photos of his victims, trophies, and a lifetime of secrets. During his confession, Rader showed no emotion. He described each killing with chilling precision, as if recounting chores on a list. He was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms, ensuring he would die behind bars. To this day, Dennis Rader remains one of the most terrifying examples of evil hiding in plain sight. A man who preached faith by day and hunted by night. The killer next door, polite, patient, and perfectly invisible. Dennis Rader didn't just kill his victims, he destroyed the illusion of safety in suburbia. Every story leaves a mark. If this one did, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss the next descent into the darker side of human nature. She looked harmless. An elderly woman with silver hair, thick glasses, and a gentle smile. She ran a boarding house in downtown Sacramento, a place for the lost, the lonely, and the forgotten. But behind her kindness was a monster hiding in plain sight. This is the story of Dorothea Puente, the death house landlady. In the 1980s, Sacramento's homeless and elderly often found their way to 1426 F Street, a two-story Victorian home run by a woman who promised food, shelter, and compassion. Dorothea Puente was known for helping people who had nowhere else to go. But what no one knew was that her generosity came with a deadly price. Puente had a past, a string of frauds, arrests, and lies. She reinvented herself over and over, changing names and husbands. By the time she opened her boarding house, she had learned exactly how to exploit the vulnerable. Her victims were often elderly men and women, people who received Social Security checks. Puente took them in, cashed their benefits, and when they started asking questions, they vanished. Neighbors noticed a foul smell from the yard. Dorothea said it was just the sewer. But in November 1988, police arrived after a social worker reported one of her clients missing. A man named Alvaro Bert Montoya, a gentle soul with developmental disabilities. When detectives searched the property, they uncovered something horrific. One shallow grave, then another, and another. By the end of the dig, 7 bodies were found buried in the garden. Each victim had been drugged and suffocated before being buried by the woman who had promised to protect them. Dorothea Puente stood on her porch, calm and polite, watching as investigators unearthed the truth, then quietly slipped away. She fled to Los Angeles, using a fake name and renting a room in a boarding house, just like the ones she'd run herself. But her face had already been plastered across national television. A man recognized her from the news and called police. When she was arrested, she looked more like a grandmother than a killer. Soft-spoken, well-dressed. But the evidence told a different story. 9 victims in total, all killed for money and buried under her own home. At her trial, Puente never showed remorse. She claimed her tenants had died of natural causes. The jury didn't believe her. She was convicted of multiple murders and sentenced to life in prison, where she remained until her death in 2011. To this day, people still walk past the old house on F Street. Some say the spirits of her victims never left. But what chills people most isn't the crime scene. It's her face, calm, kind, grandmotherly, the perfect disguise for evil. Dorothea Puente proved that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they smile, serve you tea, and promise to take care of you before burying you in their backyard. They walked among us, smiled, worked, prayed, and behind closed doors, they carried out unspeakable acts. From Bryan Kohberger to Jeffrey Dahmer, Dennis Rader, and Dorothea Puente, each one proved that evil doesn't wear a warning label. It hides behind the face of normalcy, behind family photos, behind church pews, behind the walls of houses that look just like yours. But the truth always finds its way out, and when it does, the mask falls. If you want more stories of the killers who lived in plain sight, like this video, share it with someone who loves true crime and subscribe to Crime Fior, because there are still monsters out there, and their stories are waiting to be told.